The Montana frontier was no place for the weak, especially when winter struck. Snow didn't fall here it attacked. The wind carried ice like bullets and screamed across the open plains without mercy. But Emma Carter faced it the way she faced everything in life, with stubborn courage and a heart too soft for a land this hard. Her cabin stood alone against the white wilderness, the one place that still held warmth since her husband's passing. She kept her daughters safe, fed the livestock, and defended her land from greedy ranchers who thought a widow couldn't hold her ground. Each day, she fought for their survival. Each night, she prayed for strength to do it again. That morning, as she hauled a sack of oats to the barn, the storm rolled in faster than expected, thick clouds swallowing the sky whole. The cold bit straight through her gloves, sharp as a knife point. She hurried her step, head bowed. When something dark broke the endless white ahead. At first, she thought it was just a fallen fence post or a stray cow. But the shape twitched barely. Her breath caught. A man. Collapsed in the snow. Emma glanced back at her cabin. Her daughters were inside, safe. She should have gone to them. She should have ignored the shape like most settlers would, because everyone knew the truth. There were men out there who wouldn't hesitate to harm a woman alone. Still, she couldn't leave a living soul to freeze. She approached with cautious steps, the snow crunching beneath her boots. When she knelt beside the stranger, her heart pounded. He wasn't pale like other settlers. His skin held the bronze tone of the Apache warriors she'd heard countless warnings about. Long dark hair plastered his forehead, frozen in strands. A necklace rested against his chest, feathers, beads, and something carved from bone. A warrior's mark. Fear fluttered in her ribs like a panicked bird. He's Apache. A warrior. I could be inviting danger through my own door. But then his frozen hand twitched weakly. His eyelids opened, a sliver revealing eyes filled not with threat, but pain, exhaustion, and a silent plea no words could express. She whispered, half to herself, half to God, "No one deserves to die out here. Not like this." Gathering her strength, she hooked her arms under his shoulders. He was heavy, solid with muscle, but she refused to let go. Inch by grueling inch, she dragged him toward her cabin, fighting wind that tried to rip him back to the snow's grave. By the time they reached the porch, her breath came in sharp gasps, her body soaked in sweat beneath her winter coat. The door banged open as she shoved him inside, stumbling across the threshold. Warm air rushed toward them, tangling with the icy storm like two spirits battling for possession. Her daughters rushed from the kitchen, eyes wide. "Ma, who is that?" Emma quickly locked the door behind her. "A man who needs help," she said boldly, even though fear throbbed inside her. She stripped his wet coat away, her hands shaking. The deep, jagged cuts across his arm and shoulder told a story. He'd been hunted. War or conflict had found him long before the storm did. She pressed blankets around him, lit another lamp, and heated broth on the stove. The warmth flickered across his face, revealing strong cheekbones and a jaw clenched even in unconsciousness, like a fighter refusing to surrender. His breathing was shallow. Too shallow. Emma leaned close, listening to the faint rhythm of his heartbeat. "Please hold on." She prayed silently. She lifted his head enough to take a sip of warm broth. Slowly his lips parted, taking the smallest amount, just enough to prove life still clung to him. One of her daughters whispered, voice trembling, "Ma, what if he hurts us when he wakes?" Emma rested a gentle hand on her girl's shoulder. "If we turn away from people in need, we become the danger we fear." The blizzard raged outside, pounding against the walls like a beast denied its prey. But inside, a fragile peace held one woman, two frightened girls, and a wounded warrior suspended between death and survival. Emma sat beside him, eyes refusing to stray. He was Apache, yes. A stranger, yes. A fighter, no doubt, But beneath all that, he was a human being. And mercy was the only thing that could tame a land soaked in fear and prejudice. As the fire crackled brighter, warming frozen skin and restoring faint color to his cheeks, she made a quiet promise. I dragged you from the snow, and I'll keep you alive, whatever it takes. She didn't yet know his name. She didn't know his story. She didn't know he would change her life forever. But destiny, wild as the West itself, had already found its way into her home, and the heat between them had only begun to spark. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced across the walls of Emma's cabin. Outside, the blizzard still raged, but inside, the storm had transformed into a fragile sanctuary. Emma sat on the floor beside the man she had dragged from the snow, her fingers brushing against the edge of the blanket tucked around his shoulders. Her heart raced in a mixture of fear and anticipation. Would he wake? Would he be angry? Would he even speak her language? Then his eyelids fluttered, slowly at first, like fragile curtains resisting the wind. His dark eyes opened, sharp and alert, yet clouded with pain. For a heartbeat, he stared at nothing, then focused, finally meeting hers. His gaze was fierce, wild, yet oddly vulnerable. Emma froze. She had read of Apache warrior-skilled fighters, proud and cautious, but never expected to see one here, in her cabin, under her roof. Looking at her as if deciding whether she was friend or foe, he raised a hand instinctively, brushing against his chest where the small knife had been hidden. Emma's breath caught. She realized he wasn't reaching to threaten her, but to protect himself. I mean no harm, she said softly, her voice trembling despite herself. You're safe here. He blinked, hesitating, then nodded slightly. The motion was cautious, deliberate, a man used to measuring threats, even in the face of exhaustion. Water, he rasped, his voice deep and low, foreign syllables accentuated by the faint hiss of snow air in his lungs. Emma jumped up and handed him the cup of broth she had been keeping warm. His fingers grazed hers as he took it, sending an unexpected spark through her. He drank slowly, carefully, like every sip was a victory. Finally, he leaned back against the blankets, closing his eyes briefly. Name? Dakota, he said, voice hoarse, yet laced with dignity. Scout, separated from tribe. Emma nodded. I'm Emma. You? Survived the storm. You're lucky I found you. He glanced at her, curiosity and suspicion mingling in his dark eyes. Lucky? He repeated softly. There was a shadow of a smile, a gesture so faint it could have been imagined, but Emma saw it. The ice of danger seemed to thaw slightly around him. She studied him, noting the way his muscles were tight even in rest, the tension of a warrior who never allowed himself to fully relax. His hands were calloused, marked by years of hunting and fighting. His shoulders were broad, and though the storm had weakened him, there was no mistaking the strength that lay beneath. You must be tired, she said gently. You've been out in the snow far too long. We need to get you warm, fed, and healed. He nodded again, but his gaze wandered to the small cabin's walls, the girls peeking curiously from the corner, and the fire that seemed so foreign to him. Emma realized he was taking in everything, cataloging it. Every object, every movement. This was a man trained to survive, to anticipate danger, to analyze everything before trusting it. Then, suddenly, he flinched as if hearing something behind him. Emma instinctively put a hand on his shoulder. It's safe, she whispered. Nothing can touch you here. Dakota's eyes softened, if only slightly. You, brave, he said simply. Few would. Save a stranger. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Brave. That one word carried weight, a recognition of her courage, of her willingness to act against fear and prejudice. She smiled faintly. I couldn't just leave you out there. No one deserves to die in the snow. He studied her then, really studied her, as if trying to see into her soul. Your heart. Strong, he said. Then he closed his eyes again, exhaustion overtaking him. Emma stayed by his side, brushing strands of hair from his forehead, feeling a strange warmth creep through her chest. This was no ordinary man, and this connection forming in the quiet of the cabin, between firelight and snow, was more dangerous and more intoxicating than she could have imagined outside. The storm continued its relentless fury, but inside, the world had shrunk to the space between them, a shared warmth, a fragile trust, and a spark that neither fully understood yet. She realized that saving him was only the beginning. Dakota had awakened not only from the snow, but from the invisible walls that separated two very different worlds, and in that firelit cabin, as he drifted in and out of sleep, Emma felt it, something unspoken, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The warrior was awake, and so was the danger, and perhaps so was the heat between them. The snow had stopped, leaving the Montana landscape blanketed in white, glistening under a weak winter sun. But inside Emma's cabin, the storm of emotion and tension was only beginning. Dakota's body had gained strength from her care. Yet the real test was the space between them, the distance between two worlds separated by fear, culture, and the weight of past experiences. Emma watched him as he moved cautiously around the cabin. Every gesture was precise. How he lifted a log, how he checked the fire, how his eyes scanned every corner. She realized that years of survival had made him both alert and wary. A warrior's instinct ran in every motion. But there was also curiosity, a quiet desire to understand this place, this life, and perhaps even her. "Careful with that wood," she said softly, breaking the silence as he prepared to chop a log for the fire. "It can split if you strike at the wrong angle." Dakota looked at her, dark eyes narrowing with concentration, then nodded. "Learned much?" "From others?" he asked. His accent rolled over the words, foreign yet lyrical. Emma smiled faintly, admiring his willingness to ask, to engage despite the obvious differences. "Mostly from necessity," she replied. "Life on the frontier doesn't forgive mistakes. You either learn or you don't survive." He grunted, almost contemplative, then worked carefully, following her advice. The log split cleanly on the first try. His eyes flicked to hers approval, and respect passed silently between them. It was then that her daughters peeked from the doorway. Young, curious, yet cautious. "He's not scary, Ma," whispered the youngest. Emma shook her head. "No, he's hurt, and we're helping him. That's all that matters right now." Dakota, sensing the presence of the children, lowered his eyes and smiled faintly. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. The warrior in him softened around these little lives. He helped them stack firewood, showing how to balance the logs for warmth. Emma watched, heart tightening as she saw another side of him, a gentle patience she hadn't expected. That afternoon, Emma handed him a tool to fix the barn door that had been rattled by the storm. As they worked side by side, the conversation turned tentative, cautious, but human. "You live alone?" he asked finally, glancing at the small kitchen where her daughters played quietly. "Yes," she said, "since my husband passed. It's not easy, but we manage. We have each other." Dakota nodded, understanding beyond words. "Family is strong. Keep safe." He gestured vaguely toward the girls. "Protects? At all costs." Emma felt a shiver of emotion. She realized that despite the differences in language and culture, some truths were universal. Love, loyalty, courage, and protection. As they worked, the silence grew comfortable. Not awkward, but alive with possibility. The sparks of tension that had simmered when he first woke now shifted into something more subtle, more dangerous: trust. And maybe something deeper. Emma could feel her pulse quicken every time his hand brushed hers, every time their eyes met over the barn tools. "Dakota," she said softly during a pause, "why did your tribe leave you behind? Were you scouting alone?" He hesitated, jaw tightening. "Storm separated us. I survived. Needed shelter." His voice carried the weight of isolation, and Emma understood. He wasn't used to receiving help. He was trained to rely on himself, and yet, here he was allowing her care. For the first time, he looked at her with something resembling vulnerability, and Emma's own defenses softened. She realized that courage wasn't always about fighting. Sometimes it was about letting someone in. Later, when the chores were done, they shared a simple meal of stew and bread. The firelight reflected in their eyes, warmth mingling with unspoken emotions. Words were sparse, but understanding flowed freely. Two worlds had collided under one roof, and for the first time, the walls between them began to crumble. Dakota's gaze lingered on her, unreadable yet intense. Emma felt a flutter in her chest, a dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She knew she was crossing into uncharted territory, welcoming a man whose life and culture were vastly different from hers. But she also knew that sometimes the frontier demanded that you trust the unexpected, embrace the unknown, and let courage guide the heart. And as the snow glistened outside, a silent promise formed between them: the warrior and the woman. Two strangers from different worlds would navigate this harsh land together, because in the West, survival meant more than enduring the storm. Sometimes it meant letting someone into your home and your heart. Winter had begun to loosen its grip on the Montana frontier, but the landscape was still unforgiving. Inside Emma Carter's cabin, life had settled into a cautious rhythm. Dakota, now stronger, moved with the ease of a man returning to health, and the children had begun to accept him as a presence in their small household. Yet, peace was a fragile thing in the West. Danger often arrived unannounced, carried by men who valued greed over humanity. One late afternoon, the sound of hooves against snow-trodden earth cut through the quiet. Emma's heart sank as she looked out the frost-fogged window. A group of mounted men approached, led by none other than Rufus Harlan, the wealthy rancher who had been pressuring her to sell her land for months. His scowl could freeze fire itself, and his men carried the air of those accustomed to doing whatever their master demanded. Emma instinctively placed a hand on the nearest broom, as if it could protect her home. Dakota, standing behind her, caught her gesture. His eyes narrowed, sensing the threat immediately. "Harlan," she said, voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "What brings you here?" Rufus dismounted with a show of arrogance, boots crunching in the snow. He spat into the icy wind. "I hear you've taken in a friend of the Apache," he said, eyes flicking to Dakota. "You do well to remember who owns what around here, Emma. That man leaves this land alive only if I say so." Emma's pulse quickened, but she refused to show fear. "Dakota is my guest. You will leave him alone. Or you'll go through me first." Harlan laughed, cruel and sharp, as if her words were a joke. Brave words from a widow with a couple of girls and a cold cabin. "You think a man like him can stay alive against my men?" Dakota stepped forward, his presence commanding. Though he had been weakened by the snowstorm, there was no doubt that he was still a warrior. His eyes, dark and steady, met Harlan's with a silent challenge. "You forget," he said in measured English, "I am not alone, and I fight for those I protect." Harlan scoffed, but the fire in Dakota's gaze caused him to hesitate. Emma noticed the subtle shift and knew this was no ordinary standoff. Dakota wasn't just recovering, he was asserting himself. Defending the home she had risked everything to maintain. Emma took a deep breath. "We've survived worse storms than this," she said firmly. "You'll find nothing here but respect for a man who needs it. Now leave." Harlan spat again, this time at her feet. "You're making a mistake," he warned. But there was uncertainty in his voice now, a flicker of doubt as he sized up Dakota. Slowly, he signaled his men to mount up. "This isn't over," he growled, and the group rode off, leaving a swirl of snow in their wake. When the door clicked shut behind them, the cabin seemed impossibly quiet. Emma turned to Dakota, relief mingled with concern. "They won't give up," she whispered. Dakota's jaw tightened, eyes scanning the horizon visible through the frost-cracked window. "No," he admitted, voice low. "But we are ready. I will not let them harm you. Or your daughters." Emma felt warmth spread through her, a mix of gratitude and something she could not name. Here was a man from a world so different from hers, yet willing to stand for her, to fight by her side. It stirred emotions she had thought long buried: hope, courage, and a dangerous flutter of desire. Over the next hours, they prepared. Dakota repaired fences, secured windows, and made sure the barn could withstand any sudden intrusion. Emma taught her daughters to stay quiet and trust in the warrior beside them. In the shared labor and whispered strategies, the tension between Emma and Dakota deepened, not only as protector and protected, but as two souls discovering trust, respect, and the faint pulse of attraction. That night, as they lit the fire and the wind howled outside, Emma realized the truth. The storm outside had become nothing compared to the storm they faced together. And for the first time, she felt certain that, despite the danger, having Dakota in her life was a blessing she could not afford to let go. He caught her glance across the firelight, reading the unspoken thought. "You are brave," he said quietly. "Not just today, not just for me, but always." Emma's heart raced. Words were no longer enough. Trust had formed, and with it, something more, an unspoken promise that whatever the West threw at them, they would face it together. And outside, the snow-covered plains waited silent, white and wide, but inside, courage, loyalty, and the first whispers of love had taken root. The night settled over the Montana plains like a soft, cold blanket, yet inside Emma Carter's cabin, the warmth of the fire could not compete with the heat building between her and Dakota. The events of the day, the storm, the confrontation with Rufus Harlan, and the realization that danger was never far had left both of them tense, alert, and alive in ways neither expected. Dakota had finished fortifying the cabin for the night. The girls were asleep upstairs, dreaming of simpler days, oblivious to the storm outside and the more dangerous storms lurking in the hearts of adults. Emma sat by the fire, stirring the last of the stew, her mind restless. "Dakota," she said softly, hesitant, "do you ever rest? I mean, really rest?" He looked up from where he cleaned his tools, eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Rest, not easy. When you live as I have, trust is a fragile thing. Danger always near." Emma nodded. She understood. Life on the frontier demanded constant vigilance. But there was something more here, a war within his heart, and she felt drawn to it even as it frightened her. He stood and approached the fire, careful not to sit too close, respecting the space that wasn't entirely his. "You, brave," he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than words alone. "Not because of your strength, because you face fear and do what must be done." Emma's breath caught. His words weren't just praise. They were recognition, understanding, and something that felt dangerously like admiration. She realized that courage, when shared, could ignite more than just survival instincts. It could kindle connection. For a long moment, They simply watched the fire, each lost in thought. Then Dakota spoke again, softer this time, almost hesitant. Fear can be teacher, but courage is choice. You choose courage every day. Emma's heart thumped. She thought of the barn, of the snowstorm, of dragging him inside when the world outside would have left him to die. She thought of the children watching him, of the firelight dancing in his eyes. She realized she had chosen courage before, and she had chosen it again, this time in a new way. For someone else. Their hands brushed as she passed him the ladle, a fleeting touch that lingered longer than expected. Both of them felt it a jolt, electric and unexpected, that carried the weight of unspoken words and unacknowledged desire. Dakota looked at her, dark eyes searching hers as if asking silently, "Is it wrong to feel warmth in this cold world?" Emma swallowed, suddenly aware of the flutter in her chest. "Dakota, she began, then stopped, realizing that words were fragile here, inadequate for the emotions that had begun to rise between them. He stepped closer, careful, patient. "I understand," he said simply, and it was enough. The fire crackled between them, warming the space, softening the tension. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to share more than just survival. To share life. To share fear, courage, and perhaps eventually love. She saw in Dakota not just a warrior, but a partner. Someone who could stand beside her against the hardships of the frontier and the cruelty of men like Rufus Harlan. He reached out again, this time resting his hand lightly on hers. The warmth was electric, a spark that made both of them pause. Emma felt her pulse racing, and she knew that she wasn't afraid, at least, not of him. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the cabin was a sanctuary of shared courage and quiet longing. Each moment of tension and fear they had endured together had built a bridge between them, one constructed not from walls or fences, but from trust, understanding, and the fire of human connection. Finally, Dakota spoke, voice low, almost a whisper. "Tomorrow. We face whatever comes." "Together?" Emma nodded, heart swelling. "Together," she said, her voice steady, full of conviction. In that simple word, everything shifted. The storm outside no longer seemed insurmountable. Fear no longer held them hostage. Courage shared, chosen, and felt deeply had become the foundation for something more. Something enduring. As the fire burned low, they sat side by side, close but not yet touching, hearts aligned in a rhythm only they could hear. And in the quiet glow, Emma realized that the frontier had given her more than survival. It had given her hope. It had given her a warrior she could trust. And perhaps, one day soon, it would give her love. In the West, courage could be a shield. And sometimes it could ignite the heart. Winter was slowly giving way to spring. The Montana plains, once a harsh expanse of snow and ice, now glimmered with the promise of new life. Wildflowers peeked from the thawing earth, streams gurgled with melted snow, and the air carried a freshness that felt almost magical after months of relentless cold. Inside Emma Carter's cabin, life had transformed in subtle, profound ways. Dakota had fully recovered, strong and alert, yet no longer a stranger in her home. He had become part of the household, teaching the girls, helping with chores, and sharing stories of his tribe. In return, Emma had opened her home and her heart, bridging a gap between two very different worlds. The calm of spring was interrupted one morning by the sound of distant voices and the faint beat of drums. Emma stepped onto the porch, squinting against the morning sun. A group of riders approached through the meadow. Dakota tensed, recognizing the movement of his people. "Dakota!" One of the riders called. "We've been searching for you. Your tribe feared you lost to the winter storms." Emma felt a tug of anxiety. The man she had come to trust and care for was part of a world she barely understood. She wondered, would he leave? Would he abandon the life he had begun to build with her and her daughters? Dakota dismounted slowly, then turned to her. His dark eyes softened, the fierceness replaced with something more tender. "Emma, I must return with my people to ensure peace and honor," he said. "But I do not leave without you." Her heart leaped. I don't want you to go," she whispered, realizing in that moment how deeply she had come to care for him. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I do not seek to take your life from you," he said, voice low. "I seek to build a life together. Here, with you." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She had faced storms, threats, and the harshest of winters, and now, here was a man who had risked everything to protect her, who stood willing to bridge the chasm between their worlds. She nodded. "Then stay," she said simply. "With us." "With me?" Dakota smiled, and in that smile, Emma saw not just love, but the promise of unity, trust, and shared courage. Together they returned to the cabin, greeted by the delighted faces of her daughters. The household was no longer just a home. It was a family, a fusion of cultures, experience, and hearts bound by compassion. In the days that followed, Dakota's tribe visited, curious but respectful of the woman who had saved their warrior. Emma welcomed them, teaching them about frontier life while they shared their traditions and wisdom. Differences that once seemed insurmountable became bridges of understanding. The West was harsh, but together they had made it a place of cooperation, respect, and hope. One afternoon, standing on the porch, Emma and Dakota watched the sun sink behind the horizon. The land stretched out before them, wide and untamed, yet it no longer felt lonely or threatening. Dakota took her hand, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. "You saved my life. And I hope to spend all my days saving yours, together." Emma smiled, squeezing his hand. "We've already saved each other," she said. "And now, we'll face the West together. As family, as partners, as one." They embraced, the warmth of the firelight from the cabin spilling into the twilight, and the Montana plains seemed to stretch infinitely, welcoming their courage, their love, and the unity they had forged. The winter storms were behind them, and the future was theirs. A house once filled with survival and solitude now resonated with laughter, shared work, and love that crossed boundaries. Emma knew the West could be unforgiving, but it had also taught her the power of compassion, bravery, and trust. In that home, under the vast sky of endless possibilities, the warrior and the widow, once strangers, had built a new dawn. The land they called home was no longer just territory. It was a symbol of courage, understanding, and the power of human connection. Educational takeaway: true courage is more than surviving the storm. It is opening your heart to the unfamiliar, choosing compassion over fear, and building bridges across differences. Strength is measured not only by what you protect, but by the lives you uplift along the way. And so, Emma, Dakota, and the children thrived together, proof that even in the harshest frontier, empathy, love, and unity could create a family and a future worth fighting for. The end.